Hey everyone, it's Matt C. This is another drive time update. Just real quickly at the top, so we are done with the campaign, the KYRIE Book 1 campaign. We successfully funded a really nice book, top of the line print quality, really nice paper, spot gloss on the cover. We've got we've got a map on the inside, kind of lining of the cover, if that kind of makes sense. I'll be showing pictures as we go along, and yeah, it looks really great. So I'm pretty stoked, and we didn't raise the funds for the poster yet. So just real quickly, there's an Elliot Fernandez movie poster that was our next stretch goal that we didn't hit. So we can't afford to do that right now. But we've got 6 weeks to print, and this is going to be 6 weeks until things are actually printed. And this isn't inside the book. This is a separate kind of perk thing that would go with this. It would be shipped along with the book, and it takes a while. It takes like another month to get it here. We're doing estimated November fulfillment. So if we can, and the thing's going to be, it's going to be an in-demand store. The Indiegogo campaign is transitioning to a store. Between now and then, so you can still order a book. It's just going to be simpler. There's not going to be all the bonus stuff, but it's still going to be, the book's still going to be there. So I'm trying to figure out the means by which we could do the poster and still kind of put it in there, whether it's a surprise or it's a add-on perk. To be honest, I've never figured out how to do add-on perks after ordering, so I don't even know. I can't pretend to know how to add that to other people's orders or to ask people to do it. So I got to figure that out. But so now the work really begins, figuring out how to get it printed. And then we're gonna the book 2 that was gonna get printed this time, we didn't meet that goal, so we're just gonna do its own campaign, which I'm kind of more happy about because that gives me more time to work on future pages. I'm halfway through book 3 now, so I can get book 3 done, but at the same time as campaigning book 2, and then I can campaign book 3 as I'm finishing book 4, which is the final book. And then we'll campaign book 4, and that's in 6-month intervals thereabouts, roughly. So in about a year and a half, the whole series will be done. And and we're kind of overprinting just a little bit, just to cover orders for both. So campaign 2 will have book 1 and 2 as an offer, as well as book 2 by itself. And I don't have to raise additional funds for the sometimes you see people, they're doing reprints, they're campaigning for a reprint and they're campaigning for a new book at the same time, which is great if you have a bigger following and you can, you need to raise like $40,000 or something. A lot of people will have a higher they have a higher financial need because they got to print multiple books and they got to print a lot of each book. Well, if I'm only asking for the money to print one book, because we have some in we can do bundle sort of deals where it's pretty reasonably priced for you to get a 2-for-1 kind of thing, or close to that. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at. That's the lay of the land right now, looking forward at the back end of this book 1 campaign. So to the drive time update, number 4. What are we talking about? We're talking about diversity in storytelling, right? So diversity, it doesn't mean less than what I'm going to call like superficial, like incidental biological diversity, I guess. It doesn't mean less than racial and gender, that kind of thing. I think I don't know, until 5 minutes ago it meant a lot more than that, and we'll get into that. But it doesn't mean less than that. And it all depends on, so this is kind of like, it's gonna be two wings, two arms of this kind of what I call this a drive time update. This is Driven Stories. I'm so sorry, Driven Stories number 4. There's kind of two components to this Driven Stories. One is about how you approach diversity, and then the other part is how to think of your story like a survey, like a science experiment, or like a you're trying to get a sample of a you're trying to like core down to a sample demographic of that's fictional ultimately, in a way, because it's not you're not talking about real characters, so you're not talking about real situations. So in some ways the demographic is fictionalized to some, but in some ways it's going to be real, right? You got to think about the culture that you're telling the story to, and you got to think about the culture that you're trying to represent. And I think it's always better, it's always more interesting, especially in comics where you got to draw the same people 100 times. Like, why not vary that up, So you want that to be, when you're taking a survey or conducting kind of a sample research sort of thing, it's better to get a wider range of your sample, so that you can really get a real sense of how things break down. Like, you don't want to ask, unless it's relevant to the experiment you're doing or the survey questions, it doesn't make a lot of sense to ask like a very narrow demographic a big broad question, right? And generally stories are asking a question, right? And so why not ask that question to people of a lot of different backgrounds? And so racial background, let's, I'm trying how to not make this be a 10-part drive, let's just say, I got myself caught up in trying to think of how to say this. We're talking about backgrounds, right? We're talking about diversity, a lot of different perspectives, and there's a lot of ways to kind of slice that pie, right? You can slice it. You can make your slices anywhere. So it can be, it depends on how you define race. Like, I'm kind of biologically, there's not a huge component to race, is my understanding. Obviously people look different because of their genetics, but what a quote-unquote race is kind of more of a cultural idea than not. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's a cultural idea, and it's very real, and it plays a lot in particularly racially diverse cultures like the United States. So if you're going to tell a story to Americans, and or if you're going to tell a story about Americans, it just makes sense to widen that scope. And the wider you can do it and still keep a hold of the reins to keep it focused and drive it towards a goal, the better off you are, I think, because you're going to get more different kinds of perspectives. It's going to be more interesting if you're doing a comic. It's going to be more fun to draw, because you're not going to get bored drawing the same skin tone the whole time, or just drawing dresses, or just drawing, female male kind of stuff. Yeah, so and so that's, I'm saying if, right? If with because America's particularly diverse. I think it's more diverse than any country I've been to, and I've been to a fair portion. I was in Mexico a couple weeks ago. I was in Mexico City. Really love that town, and it's a huge metropolis, right? It's like 15% of Mexicans live in Mexico City. That's gigantic. It's as big as New York City. I think it's around 9 million or something. It's a lot, and not a lot of racial diversity there. That's nothing. Now, some would tell you that's a bad thing. They wouldn't. They'd hesitate to say that about the Mexican capital, but I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. I wouldn't say that's a good thing. I would just say that's a phenomenon. That's just what Mexico is. So if you're going to tell a story, think of the movie Roma that won that Oscar a little while back. At least I think it did. It was last year's kind of pick of the year. Got a lot of controversy because it was a Netflix movie. It's a very diverse film, right? It's all Mexicans, so it's all. Actually, I didn't finish it, so watch me talk about a movie I haven't finished. It was very diverse because it wasn't less than superficial diversity, incidental biological diversity. There were people who were more ethnically from a Spanish background. There were people who were more mixed, and people who were more ethnically indigenous Mexican, right? The terms are escaping me right now for these types of people, but I feel like I'd get this video would get flagged for me naming people's racial backgrounds. Who knows? Whatever. It wasn't less than that, but so this is me kind of trying to land the plane. So it's not less than those superficial traits, but it's definitely a lot more if you're really trying to slice the pie as widely as you can. Man, I mix metaphors like no one's business. I don't even think that one works. If you want like a wide survey range, right? If you want to perform an experiment through the question of your story, and you want to see how many dimensions you can find to the answers to that question that you're posing, you're going to need a lot more than just superficial backgrounds. Because if everyone thinks it comes from a background and they all end up thinking the same, they all end up answering your question the same, then you haven't really demonstrated diversity very much. It might look like diversity. The pages might look diverse, but the story isn't diverse. And that could be a thing you want to do too. There's going to be reasons. There's no wrong story approach, I think. But it's going to be less interesting for me to read it. That's for sure. I want to see dialogue. I don't want to see monologue. I don't want to see... yeah. So, and so the Roma movie, it wasn't less than gender and racial diversity, and little kids and parents and people of different socioeconomic stratum interacting and dialoguing. They had all those traits, but they also had worldview differences too, which was neat. Similarities and differences. You're going to have to explore similarities, of course, that transcend those boundaries. And Roma, as much as I saw it, it portrayed that really well. You can be a little kid and you can be an adult, and you can have things in common in your worldview. You can be rich and poor, and you can see things similarly. Sometimes people overlook that as well. There are things that draw us together. You're going to find this in every story that's, that ranks in your top 10. There's going to be things that push us apart and things that draw us together. Those things can be things you can see with your eyeballs, and they're things that you discover through friendship and community and interaction. So you've got that's a lot of different ways to get at diversity. It's some of it is skin deep, and a lot of that really comes down to culture. But because it comes down to culture, that means it actually goes deeper than skin deep. And the wider the margin that you take with your story, depending on the culture that you're telling it from, because some people would say there's only one type of person being represented in Roma. And that's not the case at all. But maybe from an American perspective, where things get kind of broken down differently, it does look kind of racially narrow, you would say. But that's, the Mexican perspective is that there's things break down a lot differently there, and that in the movie explores it. So yeah, this is a little less focused perhaps than I was hoping, but just to hit the bullet points. So you're performing an experiment. You're asking a demographic, and the demographic being just whoever you happen to have in your story. So it's going to be, it's better to do a diverse demographic than not, I think, because you're going to get more answers, more different kinds of interesting answers. Some that you would agree with and some you wouldn't, probably. But it's going to be your job to ask a wide range of people, fictional people in your story, your question, and see how they deal with it over the course of the tale that you're telling. And you're gonna get in a broader range because there's of audience people too, depending on who you're trying to reach with that, because there's going to be more people who are going to see their views expressed in the wider range. I think you're going to get, and you're going to get more of interactions, which is kind of important, because you're going to get more people saying, because you're getting so many different perspectives, there's going to be more people disagreeing with certain characters. But that kind of makes things interesting, That's a storytelling component that really draws you as a reader of other people's stories to be more engaged. You think of a lot of the stories that you really enjoy and maybe grew up with had some characters that you liked and characters you didn't, and that has to do with how they're answering the question of the tale. So, yep, that's kind of rambling, but that's Driven Stories number 4. All these things kind of overlap, don't they? I think number 1 was being triggered by your characters. That kind of plays into what we're doing here, because you have to disagree with your characters sometimes. But I was hoping to kind of weave that into this, but I didn't, so I don't know why I brought it up. Anyway, thanks for listening to this. I'll have more Driven Stories coming out as I think up a good topic. Trying to do probably 1 or 2 a week for the indefinite future, and if there's KYRIE book updates, I'll kind of stuff them in at the beginning or end as well. And yeah, so that's Driven Stories number 4. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.